This year I've been studying for my history bachelor's at university. As there is no university in Jersey, many other young people, like myself, leave to go to the mainland UK to study. I plan to return to Jersey after I've graduated, but many other young people from Jersey who go to university are unable to return. Unlike myself, they don't have a choice in leaving Jersey. Because of the ongoing housing crisis and the cost of living, thousands of Jersey people are forced to leave their island home due to never being able to afford the rising costs of rent and housing. Despite the current government of Jersey refusing to accept the blatant facts of the situation, Jersey is in the middle of a housing crisis. A recent report has indicated that house prices have risen by 16% in the last year alone and have been rapidly increasing for the past decade. According to the most recent statistics, the average cost of a house in Jersey is now £660,000. By comparison, the average cost of a house in the UK is just £280,000, and even buying a house in London is cheaper than it is in Jersey. The price of a single one-bedroom apartment, the start for most trying to get onto the property ladder, has nearly doubled in the last decade. As of today, the average one-bedroom apartment will cost you £340,000. But if you need a four-bedroom house for your sizable family, that will cost you on average £1,340,000. And that price has increased by 2/3 in the last 5 years alone. If you are unable to afford these prices and have just given up hope of ever being able to afford your own home, you can always just rent an apartment, surely. But with private rent being raised between 5 to 10% each year, it is no wonder that many of my friends still live with their parents. So let's take a look at a few examples of available apartments being advertised for rent on the market, shall we? So you have this 16 meter squared studio apartment being sold for investors only, so plebeian locals need not apply. This is being advertised for £750 per month. So yeah, that's actually a bargain by Jersey standards. Alternatively, you can just live in a prison cell for £800 a month. Your crime being under the age of 30 and living in Jersey. If you want something a little less dystopian, you can always rent these 0-bedroom studio apartments for only £1,000 per month. This way, you might actually have a chance to save up and buy your own house. Maybe, perhaps. If you prefer a little more space, you can rent out this 1-bedroom apartment for £1,500 per month. Though the apartment does not come with an oven, so you're going to have to make do with the microwave. Or, how about paying £1,700 per month to live in a fucking garden shed in somebody's back garden? I mean, come on now, what the actual fuck is this? I thought living in a prison was bad. Imagine paying £1,700 per month to live in a shack as someone's personal zoo. Even when people are able to afford the high price of housing, when modest apartments are put up for sale, people will line up in queues down the street, with many people even being desperate enough to camp on the footpath overnight for the opportunity of buying a 2-bedroom apartment, some of which haven't even been built yet. If you talk to the average Jersey person, anyone who earns an average wage or less, they will tell you that the main problem facing Jersey at the moment is the cost of housing. Further still, most of them will also tell you that Jersey's population is a major factor that is exacerbating the issue. Those who ignore the severity of the crisis risk perpetuating the political inaction that, in turn, makes the crisis even worse. The housing catastrophe, as some have called it, is causing an unprecedented rise in poverty on the island and is forcing thousands of islanders to flee Jersey to find more affordable places to live. Yet, many people think of the island of Jersey as being a place of abundant wealth and holiday luxury. How could such a prosperous country be plagued by such a disastrous problem? The primary root of the housing crisis is quite simple: immigration. Whilst this topic is quite contested in other countries, Jersey has a unique situation whereby we are a very small island with a rapidly growing population. This means that Jersey is the 14th most densely populated place in the world, with a similar population density as Bangladesh. Obviously, the density and size of Jersey plays a part. However, Jersey's sister island of Guernsey is just as small and compact as Jersey is, yet they don't have the same crisis with housing costs as Jersey does. This is because Jersey, in comparison, has a very open immigration policy that has seen the rate of growth on the island surpass that of which is sustainable, both for the housing supply and for the island's utilities. Now, this is just one of the reasons that is causing the housing crisis, but the issue of immigration is certainly the most important one.
In 2014, the government made a target for setting the rate of inward immigration into Jersey to 325 people a year. This figure was suggested by a commissioned report to be the most sustainable rate of growth that Jersey could sustain. Instead, the government has allowed the rate of immigration to surpass 1,000 to even 1,500 people every single year. That is 3 to 4 times over the amount that is needed for a sustainable rate of growth on the island. What is more is that the rate of inward migration is far higher than that of natural population growth on the island. In 2015, for example, the net immigration rate was 1,500 people coming into the island, but only 220 people were being born. In 2019, Jersey had 1,000 people coming in, but only 90 new people from natural growth. That's a 10 times difference.
And along with such limited space on an already rapidly urbanizing island, it is this that is the primary root of the housing crisis in Jersey. The politics of Jersey can be quite tricky to explain, but to give a brief and grossly oversimplified explanation, the housing crisis in Jersey has developed under the current government, which is run by the conservative Alliance Jersey Party. Not only has the crisis gotten worse under this government, but the action, and more often than not the inaction, of the Alliance Party government has the accessibility and cost of housing gotten worse. Additionally, you will see the name of Sam Mezek come up quite a lot in this video, and Mezek is a member of the Social Democratic Reform Jersey Party, which is the second largest party in Jersey after the Alliance Party.
Since the rate of immigration has increased substantially in the last decades, the State's Assembly, the Parliament of Jersey, mandated that the government provide an immigration plan to fix the issue. Instead, our government simply said, "Sorry, we just don't have the time to do that, so no can do," and simply just ignored the issue. Every time there is ever any limited amount of governmental action, we're just given watered-down empty reports and vague plans that are never fulfilled. And each time, the ruling government party is criticised for their lack of effort and unwillingness to address the issue. Simply put, the current economic policy that has fostered the housing crisis was encouraged by the Alliance Party government. The open immigration policy has allowed for businesses to grow, and the rapid climb in housing prices has greatly benefited construction companies, estate agents, and landlords. Yet, this policy is also having a disastrous effect on the local working and middle classes. What is more is that 16 out of the total 49 members of the State's Assembly are themselves landlords, and the majority of the ruling Alliance Party are also landlords. Despite declaring their interests as landlords during parliamentary votes, they're still able to vote, and often vote against policies that conflict with their personal financial interests, instead of voting in the interests of the Jersey people. Jersey's Minister of the Treasury, Susie Pinnell, has even gone as far as to say that the housing problem is not, in fact, a crisis, it's just a bit of a challenge. She stated that, quote, "I acknowledge that the current housing situation is a very important issue for both government and islanders, but personally, I do not like the overuse of the word crisis." She went on to say that you can see in places like Africa and India a crisis and poverty. We do not have that here. We might have a challenge. And yes, it's gotten so bad that the only comparison is literally Africa. Good job, guys. In June of 2021, Sam Mezek and his colleagues from Reform Jersey lodged a proposition to ban rent increases above the rate of inflation, cut social housing rents to 80% of the market rate, and force the government to declare a housing affordability crisis. These set of policies would have gone a long way to address the housing crisis, short of limiting immigration. However, the government rallied together to vote down the proposition, putting in a tremendous amount of effort to persuade the State's Assembly to vote against Reform Jersey's propositions. The vote was narrowly defeated by 25 to 21 due to the coordinated campaign by the government's ministers to stop the proposal from passing. Instead, the government launched their own counterplan to address the housing challenge, which was immediately criticised as lacking any real substance, consisting of asking people to pretty please downsize their homes and proposing policies that had already been put into place. A majority of their proposal was in fact a report, reporting on a previous report and coming to the conclusion that they need more time and money to make further reports. Naturally, this was criticised as, quote, political cowardice, with the Jersey Tenants Forum stating in response that people are already facing 20% rent increases now. What's happening is that people are being priced out of the island. The government does not have a plan to deal with that. It does not look at the bigger picture. They do not have a long-term plan, and they are not prepared to take any action now. They need to make a decision about what the island is going to look like in 10 years. You will have a lot of very wealthy people who own a lot of homes, but most people will not be able to buy. And I'm talking about anyone that has an income below £75,000. That's the direction the island is going in. They either have to pay people more and therefore need to tax more, or they need to build accommodation and pay people to be in it. At the moment, there's nothing. Rich people can buy houses and rent them to poor people at whatever cost they want. This is not sustainable now, and it's not going to be sustainable in 10 years. Where the problems really begin to manifest is that there are no laws to dictate how much social housing has to be built under development, so property developers are incentivized to build luxury houses for wealthy immigrants, because they are more profitable than building social housing. This not only deprives most people from being able to buy affordable housing, but also encourages immigration from the UK, which makes the problem worse. It also means that the only people who can actually buy the expensive social housing apartments are big housing agencies, who just buy it to rent it out and thus prevent ordinary Jersey people from getting onto the property ladder. What is more is that wealthy immigrants can simply bypass the housing qualifications entirely by using the high value residency scheme, commonly called 11K. All they have to do is simply purchase a house in Jersey worth more than £1.75 million, or even a flat worth £900,000. They're not even required to move to Jersey, or even live in the house or flat that they buy. They can just rent it out. Not to mention that there are other ways of investing into Jersey's property market without ever having to set foot on Jersey.
Although there is no mandated quota for social housing to be built, the state-owned social housing company Andium has provided fantastic affordable housing in Jersey. However, its scale of implementation is nowhere near enough to address Jersey's housing problem. To put it simply, the government of Jersey has not allowed Andium to develop enough affordable housing to reach the needs of Jersey's population. Not even close. In fact, they have held back on allowing building of social housing. Indeed, the government has released plans for an elaborate and flashy housing development at the waterfront and South Hill areas of Jersey's capital of St. Helier. The government has only mandated that just 15% of the houses in these massive developments be affordable housing. When Reform Jersey tried to have 50% of the houses be affordable. This was immediately voted down by the government ministers in the states of Jersey. When Sam Mesick proposed a compromise figure of 30% affordable housing, this was also voted down. Most shocking, however, was when the government voted against Mesick's proposal for a 30% affordable housing quota. Philip Lesueur, a member of the government party, admitted that he had accidentally voted for Sam Mesick's proposition on his computer and said, "It appears my computer has more of a social conscience than I do." What the fuck? In total, the Jersey government's plan, if elected, is to build a meager 1,000 affordable homes by 2025. However, considering that there are currently 3,000 people on the first-time buyer and social housing waiting list, this pathetic plan will only sustain a third of those already waiting to buy a home, and by 2025 that number will most certainly be higher. These are just a few examples in the previous year of the Jersey government's inability to properly address the housing crisis. As previously stated, this is an issue that has been steadily getting worse over the past decade. The current government of Jersey completely lacks the political will to properly address the issue, because what is actually needed to maintain a sustainable cost of living in Jersey would require them to vote against their financial and ideological interests. Now, have in mind that there are people in Jersey that disagree with this assessment, but I think it is interesting to note that most of them that I have come across at least were either not born in Jersey or have a comfy job that earns more than £80,000 a year. Jersey's average household income is £42,000 a year. Granted, this is still significantly higher than the average yearly wage in the UK by an extra £10,000, but again, the wealth of the super rich in Jersey distorts the true living conditions of the average Jersey person. In reality, more than half of Jersey's population has an income very similar to that of the UK, yet our house prices are 3 times more expensive. Now, if you have that in mind, along with the average income, with the fact that the price of housing in Jersey is rising at a cost of about £1,850 every single week, that means that the average person in Jersey cannot even afford to ever buy themselves a house and will be very lucky to get a chance or even consider getting onto the property ladder. Simply put, the price of housing is rising faster than what people are earning, and the cost of rent is swiftly increasing higher than that of the working wage. Some people have said, rather obnoxiously and naively, that people can just get a better paying job. It's that simple, apparently. But even if a Jersey person were to work in finance, which is the best paying sector in Jersey, their average income would still only be, on average, about £1,200 a week. That still won't be enough to keep up with the rising cost of housing, let alone bring any hope of affordability, meaning that you would need to be earning in the top 20 percentile to even match the rising cost of housing, unless of course you're already loaded with daddy's money or are already on the property market.
The housing crisis has been said to be the single biggest threat to Jersey's prosperity. An obvious outcome of the rising cost of housing in Jersey is the development of homelessness. Recently, there has been a substantial rise in homelessness in Jersey, concurrent with the massive increases in housing and rent prices. The problem has become so bad that homeless shelters are struggling at full capacity and are being forced to turn away islanders who have recently become homeless after not being able to afford their rent. One such homeless shelter charity has said that, "I think the current housing situation, in terms of the ever-increasing house prices and rental costs, is the biggest crisis Jersey has seen for many years." Jersey, officially the richest place in the world, has also seen the rapid rise in the use of food banks that hand out food for free to those who are not being paid enough to afford the rising costs of living. In Jersey, there are 10 times as many homeless people as there are empty holiday homes. Indeed, there has been an increase in vacant houses in Jersey, a number that now stands at 4,000, which represents 8% of the total number of houses in Jersey. About a quarter of that number are unused holiday homes. There are just as many people in Jersey on the social housing waiting list as there are holiday homes collecting dust for when their owners come over to stay in the summer. Just think about that for a moment. Instead of addressing the core of the issue with housing, that being immigration, the government instead insists on finding more land to build houses, which just sustains and perpetuates the demand, making the problem even worse. Not just that, rapid urbanization also threatens the agriculture industry in the scenic fields that make Jersey so special. For instance, the Jersey government has attempted to build housing on free fields that are vital to Jersey's local milk production. With the depletion of available fields for agriculture, Jersey is at serious risk of completely destroying our dairy industry. If urbanization continues, Jersey could see the end of the famous Jersey cow, the symbol of our island pride. There is simply no more room left to build that won't have a serious impact on Jersey's agriculture and heritage. Local dairy farmer Andrew Legale said of the government plan that these fields are of critical importance not just to the farmer as an organic dairy producer, but to the whole of the dairy industry in the island, and that the attempted development on the fields pose a very real threat to our existence, and yet we are at the centre of a heritage mark of our island.
None of my friends have any definitive plans to stay on Jersey. Many are planning to leave and never to return. The current housing crisis has caused an exodus of young Jersey-born people to flee the island. As I have said, when young people leave for university, they simply stay in the UK and never come back. Thousands of people in Jersey are planning to leave Jersey because they are unable to afford to pay their rent, or are unable to afford a home, or are unable to keep up with the rising costs of living. Indeed, a survey of islanders found that 2/3 of the respondents were considering leaving Jersey because of the rising cost of housing. A staggering 20% of that number have already made plans to leave Jersey. Many people I know refer to Jersey as a sinking ship that islanders need to escape. As much as I love Jersey, for many people I know, I can only advise that they do find opportunities elsewhere, and I find that horrible. People ought to have a right to live where they were born.
Sam Mesick summarises this very well. Jersey could look very different if the island does not encourage young people to stay and students to return from university. Intelligent and well-educated people will end up serving other economies because they cannot afford to live here. Opportunities for a future skilled workforce will decrease, and we will have to import labour to replace islanders who could have stayed in Jersey had they been able to afford reasonably priced accommodation. This will lead to a changing character of our island, and the population will become more transient. We will see a decrease in culture, and Jersey will look a lot different if we cannot encourage our young people and students to stay in Ireland.
I've also been told to just wait and bide the dip for when the housing market in Jersey crashes, but due to the cost of housing, young people are constantly leaving the island. In the last 2 decades, the outward migration of Jersey-born people has been between around 4,100 and 3,600 people every single year. That's 7 to 8% of Jersey's native population disappearing from Jersey every decade. On the other hand, wealthy immigrants who move in from the United Kingdom or elsewhere are able to afford the expensive homes that are built or put onto the market. So there is a constant demand for higher house prices from immigrants, and there will never be a crisis of affordability because the poor just move to the UK. Basically, Jersey exports young locally born people who are unable to afford housing, and in comes immigrants who are able to afford the housing that is built. Because of this, the bubble will never burst. It's a constant cycle that just goes on and on. Either our native people will disappear from the island forever, and our native culture disappears with them, or political change will force the demographic shift to stop. So, what can be done to fix this mess and allow Jersey to become a more affordable place to live? Well, the most usual answer that is made is just to build more houses. The more houses that are built, the lower the housing costs are, right? In the case of Jersey, this simply does not work. The solution of rapid construction of houses and apartments certainly works in most other countries, but for Jersey, there is a number of factors that prevents the solution. Firstly, Jersey is a tiny island of only 116 square kilometers in size, yet has a population of 103,000 people. As I said before, we have a similar population density as Bangladesh and many other large cities across the world. Whereas there are plenty open space and derelict land in other countries, in Jersey, every piece of land has an immense value due to the limited space there. I'm not a NIMBY, but there is simply no room left to build on Jersey. The population density is only getting more severe and putting further strain on Jersey's hospitals, schools, and other services. Building more housing would simply create more supply, and thus more demand, and thus more immigration to the island, and perpetuate the problem further. More so, in the past decade, the number of houses has increased more than the number of households, yet the cost of housing has been rising faster than ever before. Whereas Jersey's sister island of Guernsey has a much different system. Remember, Guernsey is just as small and compact as Jersey is, yet they don't have the same problems with housing costs as Jersey does. Why is this? In Guernsey, there functions a two-tiered housing system, where locals buy and sell their houses on a separate market, called the local market, to immigrants, but they can sell their houses on another separate market called the open market, which immigrants can buy from. This means that locals are not outcompeted by wealthy immigrants, and outsiders can still move to Guernsey and buy houses at a higher cost from locals on the open market. On average, houses being advertised on Guernsey's local market are about £150,000 cheaper than houses being sold in Jersey. Now, yes, these prices are still higher than what they are in the UK, as Guernsey is still a small island like Jersey and lacks abundant space. Yet, it is a lot easier for a local person to afford a home in comparison to Jersey because of the lack of outside competition. Which just goes to show that it's not a matter of being a small island, but in fact a matter of population and immigration. Whilst this video has admittedly been quite doom and gloom, I wish to tell you the facts of how bad the problem of housing is in Jersey. That being said, the crisis can certainly be fixed. The most obvious and only serious solution to solving the housing crisis is to enact genuine immigration controls that will prevent the demographic problem in Jersey and will, by effect, solve the main cause of the housing crisis. However, until we reach that point in time where Jersey's population becomes sustainable, other measures need to be taken to ensure that the spiraling increase in housing costs is prevented. These policies include lowering social rent to the same rates as they are in the UK, temporarily banning landlords from raising rent beyond the rate of inflation, banning offshore property investors from competing in the local market, implementing a landlord licensing scheme, only allowing affordable housing to be built on government-owned land, further laws that protect tenants, affordable housing quotas on new developments, and enacting a empty homes tax. However, my personal favourite solution would be implementing a Guernsey-styled two-tier housing system that will enable native Jersey people to have control over the local market and stabilise the speculative housing prices. Most importantly of all, Jersey is having an election very soon, on the 22nd of June this year, where Jersey will elect a new government into office. So, if Jersey wants change, people are going to have to believe in a better future and vote for it. It should be worth noting that most of the aforementioned proposals to fix the housing crisis are also policies proposed in Reform Jersey's 2022 election manifesto. What is more is that all of these proposals have actually already been lodged by the Reform Jersey Party and have been voted on, which just goes to show how serious the party is in solving the cost of housing and rent on the island. If elected, Reform Jersey will also declare a housing crisis emergency in the first week of office and immediately implement their housing action plan to prevent the crisis from escalating any further. Most importantly of all, since their party's foundation in 2014, Reform Jersey has persistently and consistently campaigned for a robust and effective immigration control for our island. From the very first year of foundation, Reform Jersey proposed that inward migration to Jersey be limited to just 215 people a year. I have tried to stay factually neutral throughout this video, however you may have noticed that I've had certain biases towards propositions brought forward by Reform Jersey, and I am certainly hopeful about their ability to change Jersey for the better after the next election. That being said, I cannot afford to be politically neutral on such an important issue that threatens the very existence of the Jersey people and our island home. If you are from Jersey and have registered to vote, I encourage you to research the voting record of each candidate and party in your district and vote accordingly in the coming election for those who will actually do something about the ongoing housing crisis. I use the website theyworkforyou.je to help me understand the voting history of each candidate. Additionally, Reform Jersey's website has a fantastic tool that shows how members and parties in the state's assembly have voted on important issues such as housing affordability, but also other issues such as environmentalism and social welfare. Again, if you live in Jersey and are able to vote, please go to your local polling station on the 22nd of June and vote for a better Jersey and help us get out of this mess. Abito e alla prochaine.